Mexico City is having a water crisis. 22 million people, one of the largest city in the world. Depending on the severity you anticipate, some people are calling it day zero by the summer. They might run out of water by the summer. How do you fix that?
Not quickly at all. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I just think that's the point, is that you see energy crisis, energy security. We need to invest in more clean energy, geothermal, solar, wind.
I think it's just going to be this crazy thing where you're right. You adopt it, you're going to get better, but still untapped markets, like massive amount. And I think it's going to change society. And I personally think for the better. I'm not sure what your opinion is, but I just think technology makes us better.
I'm definitely of the optimist camp. There's so many things wrong right now. But at the same time, I think we're heading towards somewhere much more manageable with additional tools that we're developing through technology.
I'm Jarie Bolander, and welcome to the Entrepreneur Ethos Podcast. This podcast is all about how to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient world through educating and inspiring the next generation of entrepreneur through powerful storytelling. Let's get started. Brian Sheng, welcome to the show, man.
Super excited to be here. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I am thrilled to talk about what you're doing. You're the co-founder and CEO of Aquaria, and you are working on atmospheric water generation, which for those of you in the know what that is. For those of you that don't, well, you're going to find out exactly what this is. And a lot of people know that I actually, own land. So for me, I'm always like looking for cool things to put on it. But before we dig into that and geek out on the tech stuff, why don't you tell us how you got to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, that sounds good. But before I dive down, I want to say that I'm feeling so much good energy on this podcast. I wish this was this time tomorrow, so then we would end the week on this kind of energy, heading into the weekend.
Cool. Truly appreciate that.
But I'm going to be bringing this energy to the rest of the team, tomorrow, Friday, to end the week. So I'm glad to be on this on the show. So actually, Jarie, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, the good vibes. Just tell us a little bit of how you got to do what you're doing today. Like what was the journey to founding this company?
Yeah. So I started the company about 4 years ago now. Aquaria, obviously, like you mentioned before, we're a climate tech company, and our mission is to secure and unlock community access to clean water. And we do that by harvesting water out of thin air. But I wasn't always doing that. Before I started this company, I was actually on the other side of the table, and I was a venture capital investor. And so I had actually started a fund called Fresh VC back in 2012. And the thesis for that firm was actually impact world-changing companies that, if it worked out, it could have, positive effect and build a future for all of us. But it actually, in 2000, and I would say, wow, the years are getting mixed up, but the pandemic really put one on top of us. How I got here was essentially after, finishing investing out of that fund. We had done quite well, in that portfolio of companies. We have 2 IPOs and 6 companies that are worth 9 figures and still growing. And so I was thinking maybe I should just do another fund. But then the pandemic happened, and starting this company would literally change my life, because at the beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic, I was going around the world visiting research centers, universities, and really understanding what are some of the technology know-how and the team necessary to build Aquaria. And then I got stuck abroad for 2 years. I was supposed to be on this 2-3 weeks max trip, and then everything sort of stopped. And
wow, where'd you get stuck?
I got stuck in Singapore and in Hong Kong and China, so kind of the Asia part of the world. So that
must have been a whole other world over there, man.
And that brought me to starting up Aquaria and building everything else that led us to today.
Wow, man. Wow. So you were a VC. Interesting. And really like looking at technologies and investing in companies that were going to impact the world. Is that how you met Ravi? I know we got introduced through Ravi Karani, who's over at Liquid Assets, the podcast.
Yeah. No, I met Ravi through another mutual friend who was working in building renewable energy, net zero, and different projects like that. I think this is something I've been thinking about quite a long time, and I think now a lot of founders, a lot of investors are now finally, picking up on the mass momentum of investing in climate, that we have to do something about the future. So no, it's, I think a lot of us are part of the same network, and everyone's working on actually building a better future.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Liquid Assets, Ravi's podcast, I think it's like the number one podcast about water, because I don't know how many water podcasts there are, but not a ton, but he does such a great job of kind of understanding that whole intersection. And I just find this so fascinating, because not a lot of people invest in hardware startups much. And you are clearly a hardware startup. You're clearly a very hardcore hardware startup. I'm just curious, how was it like to raise money for a hardware startup?
Yeah, I think historically and even today, just in general, hardware is not something that investors like to invest in and look at. There's a level of risk that is perceived, and the associated characteristics of building a hardware company is very different, right? So I would say that bias still very much stands today. So actually building a company in the first stages, I actually invested my own capital. I had a lot of, passion about what I was building, and in order to get over that first hump, that wasn't necessarily the only way I could have done it. But I wanted to invest my own money into this.
Wow. Yeah. Because I mean, back in the day, in like the mid 90s, when everyone was building the information superhighway, as they said back then, there was a lot more money flowing into hardware. Semiconductors was the one that was just, that's the business I was in. And boy, you had 14 slides in a deck and it said building chips for the internet. They're like, here's $1 million, go for it. A little bit different now. So.
Well, I totally, I think that's going to change, right? I think we're heading back towards hardware.
I agree. I that's the question I was going to follow up with. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think SaaS is saturated and it's so commoditized now that, no code, low code, like there's nothing, you pretty much can build any software in the world. I'm convinced anyone could do that. You don't even have to be that knowledgeable. But hardware is hard. It's very hard. So when do you think that's going to switch over? When do you think is sort of are we in the stages of that? Because SaaS investments kind of drying up, like it's easier, but there's not as lucrative, it seems.
So the way I like to think about these things is like, what are the decade, if not longer, trends that are driving innovation for that cycle, and what enables that, right? So I think if we're talking about the 90s and semiconductors, everything, of course, that is symptomatic of what it's driving, and same thing for past 20 years, past 15 years, or whatever. Not software and atoms were driving all the innovation from to mobile to et cetera, et cetera. But you can't build climate companies without hardware. Like, you literally can't. Of course, there's optimization using software, and there's some fantastic solutions doing that to make us, accelerate towards a more sustainable future. But you literally can't manipulate the atoms without, atoms.
It's true. We haven't built the machine yet, the replicator or the energy in, energy out, but that's still hardware, right? That's still.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's happening now, right? Look at all the money being invested into renewable infrastructure. Just making anything that already exists. I think it's already here.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And how is it running your own company from being an investor point of view? I mean, I'm sure you saw some crazy stuff as an investor, and team makeup and, you put the money in and then they crater. So what are some of the things from the investor point of view that you've learned that you're now applying to running your own company?
I would have to say that prior to founding a company myself, so actually, I think I should take a step back. I thought I was incredibly operationally savvy as an investor already, because in the early days of Fresh VC, like I was 19 and I was pretending / trying to be a VC. I had raised some money from alums of my school and some friends and family. I had a bold looking thesis, but why would you take money from me? Like I'm some random person that, you might not know how old I am, but, so one of the ways I tried to really help the companies I invested in was to be very, very operationally involved, to try to help the company with whatever they needed and seeing these companies grow. And when I made these investments, typically they were very, very early stage. Like I think the earliest company I invested was like 3 weeks old or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But when I jumped over to found my company, the level of learning I had to do was just so much beyond what I thought I needed to do. And that has been a very humbling experience for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's always different, right? It's like when you're in the trench or looking at the trench. Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Jarie? Like some of the other, have you with like your all different building experiences? What do you think? What do you think the investing and the operating side?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly an operator. I've done some investing, some angel investing, but mostly founding and running companies. And what's interesting is that, how do I put this? Every startup's different. There appears to be trends and things that sort of rhyme. So like, how history doesn't really repeat itself, but it rhymes. So, I've been in this situation before, but now I got to take a different path, but I'm glad I know the path I took before. I think from just being an investor or a seed stage investor or, startup investor, I mean, I think the thing I've found is, I try to help operationally, but I'm just not there day to day. I don't know context. I can be like, you should do more podcasts. Like as a founder, I could tell you that, but I don't know day to day, like what's the challenges on your time, because you're building it. Like as the sort of investor, I'm not building it. I am enabling you and I'll give you advice and I want to be part of the solution, but I'm not in the trench daily. And so you have to have, I think, the knowledge of that, because we've had a lot of investors in some of the old companies that I was with that would give us advice. And I'm like, I'm not going to take this advice. It's just wrong. It's just plain. Like, are you in the trend? You're not, but I'd have to listen to them. Yeah, you're right. Oh, you should. I'm like, yeah, okay. And I'd be like, this is the dumbest idea, but I got to do something, right? They gave me the money. So yeah, I think it's a little different. I think once you're in the trench building, like you're the person that understands it more than anyone. Which
I think, before we're talking about like a lot of hardware, right? But I do have to say that, building a company now versus remembering the early days of the companies I've invested in, I mean, the productivity boost and the efficacy that you can achieve with AI nowadays, it's night and day. It's your output is crazy.
I would agree. I think the other thing that I find is that yes, you have more output, but the quality of the output needs the human in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen, people like, hey, we can write you 1,000 blog posts and use AI and it'll rank high and all these things, right? And then you read them and you're like, yeah, it'll give you that boost, but then it's sort of like, you're going to kind of go back down because now that's commodity and now the level's raised, right? But how are you going to stand above that? And standing above that requires the human to be like, no, I got to curate this better, right? But I do agree with you that for rules-based, systematic analysis and helping the human craft better stuff, game changer. And literally before we sat down and talked, I was with my boss on my day job and we were going over like my mega prompt corpus for doing certain things here. And I'm just like, yeah, this saves me 80% of the time. He's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, And then we're with our AI guy, and our AI guy's like, we'll figure out how to make that even better. And I'm all, it's pretty good now, but I have to be in the loop to do it. Right. So yeah, no, it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, or I think this is like the intermediary step. We're 1 year out from the launch of GPT, right? 1 year-ish. So we have organizations that are super boosted by AI with human touch. But even that, I think, is already like outside of maybe Silicon Valley, a couple of places that are readily adopting all of these tools at a 1 year pace. Even that simple tool adoption is a massive business advantage for just anybody. Just use it. Please use it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we even see this, like a lot of time and energy has been spent on software automation and technology for tech companies. SaaS is the best example of this. There's over 10,000 marketing tools. Like, you really need 10,000 marketing SaaS tools. Well, they're easy to build and there's a need, right? But if you sort of go downstream to your point about like, look, you're in climate technology or in the environment technology, you have to build hardware because you got to interact with atoms. We even see this in what I call craft and commerce companies, just like mom and pop shops, plumbers, electricians, those trades where they have not had anything really on the technology front help them be better. It's very nascent. And, we've had these things for 20 years. So it's the same thing with AI, right? I think it's just going to be this crazy thing where you're right. You adopt it, you're going to get better, but still untapped markets, like massive amount. And I think it's going to change society. And I personally think for the better. I'm not sure what your opinion is, but I just think technology makes us better.
I'm definitely of the optimist camp. There's so many things wrong right now. But at the same time, I think we're heading towards somewhere much, much more manageable with additional tools that we're developing through technology.
Yeah, like what you're doing here. Like, I love the tagline, safe, clean water from the air. As a marketing professional, that's pretty good.
Right now, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people become aware that our technology is already here today to be able to address their water problems.
Yeah. And there is a lot of water. Yeah. And there's a lot of water problems. I mean, I think, love your thoughts on how you see that, playing out, because and maybe the number on this, I don't remember off the top of my head, but most childhood death is from unclean water, like just full stop. I mean, I don't know if you know anything about that, but boy, this seems like this would be the perfect thing to fix that problem.
And there's many forms of water challenges, right? Like you just talked about contamination. There is drought, that's one form, but then there's also other types of natural disasters as well, just your ever increasing hurricanes, like that all affect our freshwater supply. And I think this is the part where, building Aquaria has been actually an eye-opening exercise around why this is such a big problem. Well, part of it is people don't think about it. People don't really think about, especially in America, more than any other country, I would say, that we don't really think about clean water as a real issue. And many people, the first thing they think of is, developing countries have clean water issues. We don't have issues with water. The government should provide the water that we need. But even in America, we have 3% of California doesn't have access to clean water. Like California.
I know. It's insane. It's insane. Right. Yeah.
And everyone, I think, that's also starting to change, which is great because there's so many people. Right now, Mexico City is having a water crisis. 22 million people, one of the largest city in the world. Depending on the severity you anticipate, some people are calling it day zero by the summer. They might run out of water by the summer. How do you fix that?
Not quickly. Not quickly at all. Yeah. I don't know. I think, go ahead.
Well, I just think that's the point, is that you see energy crisis, energy security. We need to invest in more clean energy, geothermal, solar, wind. All these are great. Nuclear, right? I am in no doubt that in 10 years we'll be living in a abundant energy future with ever increasing renewables, what about our water options?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. I agree with you. I think all the technology exists where we could be independent of fossil fuels for the majority of our energy generation within a decade, if we really wanted to. Even the nuclear option stuff, which people get all bent about. It's renewable. It lasts for, it's clean, relatively speaking, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right. I agree. It's just how come people don't think about this? What is it about these big problems that scare people?
It's scary.
There's that. Yeah, there's that.
Well, I think people realize that. I think, if you experience it, you definitely realize it. And we just have to talk about it more. We have to talk about it more, and act, especially as founders or investors. It's an education process. I mean, I don't know. I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and I'm curious, Jar, like the actually even the audience, right? Like where they come from. I don't know if you have any statistics around where the listeners for the show come from. There's very wide cultural differences in understanding of the different types of problems that we face, just based on everyone's different growing up experience. And that's education and awareness and being and talking about the issues. You can never assume that somebody else just knows, despite how intelligent or whatever the other qualifiers might be there.
Oh, and yeah, it's like lived experience too. Like, there's a good majority of people that listen from India, Eastern Europe, Europe too, just little smattering all over the world, but mostly the US. But yeah, if you grew up in India, you know full well about like water can kill you because it's not clean. It's not safe. There's stuff in it, even when I went to India back in 2000, it was just a different world, like I had a totally different realization of like how the rest of the world lives, even going to some Asian countries, like even though they're industrialized, there's still like challenges that are different, and that's the way they grow up. So for them, the power going off in India all the time, the power just go off all the time. This is the way it is. They had these massive generators in the basement that would keep the power on. And they're like, this is just life. And I'm like, power going off in the US is very rare. Not having water is very rare. Right. So yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Having spent a couple of years in Southeast Asia, not always intentionally. No, it's pretty exciting though, the amount of technology innovation and like investment to innovation happening in Southeast Asia and South Asia, like India and Singapore has a hub. And they experience way different climate challenges than we do. And I think if you look at the reports, it's also like South and Southeast Asia is where you experience the most challenges.
Yeah. I think it's just, why is that? I'm not sure why. Why is that the most challenging?
Well, if I talk about water specifically, like that's one example, the overwhelming effects of, like if you map out kind of droughts, disasters, ocean level rising, different various aspects, that you will see that geographically speaking, it overwhelmingly affects Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the population over there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. Like if you deal with it every day, like it's in your it's in your bones. Like I live in San Francisco, and during the pandemic and other times, we deal with car break-ins, just as an example. And so you're just very sensitive to when you see glass on the ground, you're like, aha, don't park there.
Oh yeah.
It's that way. And with these other things that were obviously more critical to life, you need water to live for sure.
Well, given we have such a global audience, Joe, what do you think we should talk about? What does the audience want to hear?
Well, I think a lot of it is like your experience going. So what's fascinating is there's very few investors that start companies. They all want to. It's kind of like, every billionaire wants to be an artist and every artist wants to be a billionaire. It's true. It's true. Or everyone wants to write a book, unless you're an author that's struggling to write a book, then you're like,
right.
I'd rather be an investment banker You're like, I'm an investment banker. I should write a book on how cool I am. And you're like, you got the money, you can do whatever. But I'm just like, what advice would you give entrepreneurs who, is from an investor perspective? Tell us what the playbook, what the characteristics, what investors are looking for, just so that they're a little bit more informed and educated about that process. And then actually once the investment happens, like what do you look for? What did the ones that are IPO'd and successful, like what was it? What was the magic?
Sure. Well, so the first thing I would say is that I make two different kinds of investments, and depending on how I categorize them, I think entrepreneurs need to be very aware of this, which is, are you going for a venture outcome or not? Right? Raising capital, especially venture capital, especially the Silicon Valley kind of venture capital, is a very particular type of entrepreneurship. It's a very particular entrepreneurship where the intended results have to be billion, if not, 10 billion plus outcomes. And that's what's defined as a success.
Mm-hmm.
And if you work backwards from there, that inherently then means that this has to be some kind of market that is enormous, where even if you have a very low assumption on penetration, that you can grow an incredible business there, or you're building some kind of technology or solution that is massively disruptive versus the status quo, or at least has the potential to do so. So it's a very particular pathway for building and growing a business where the intended outcome is already set in stone. So if what you're building does not fit that recipe, that's not your pathway to go. On top of that, there's also a lot of, as a founder as well, there's a lot of downsides as well to taking that kind of capital to build a business. There's a totally different pathway where you're building another type of business where you could just grow profitably, build a solution that people want, lots of people want. It doesn't necessarily have to have a multi-$100 billion market, but you can build a very successful business showing proper unit economics, showing a repeatable customer acquisition channel and strategy, and just build a good, solid business on fundamentals. Like very, very much the same as an entrepreneur. You have to build a business, but two very different pathways and two very different set of investors.
And so the exits that you mentioned that IPO, was it a combination of, obviously they were going for the big market or whatever, but was it, what was the alchemy that you saw? Was it team, the technology, their timing, what was was there some magic that came together? Was it dumb luck? Or is it just like, I got lucky and this happened?
I would say that there's definitely way smarter and more capable people than me that have already opined on this. And I think my conclusion is not particularly insightful. But I would say that, especially because what I was investing in were very early stage companies with the intended result of them being $1 billion plus outcomes. The ones that have made it incredibly successful all come down to how strong the founding team was. And to be more specific, the overwhelmingly successful founders that I've seen, there was something, it was deeply personal to them what they were working on. There was something deeply personal that is just simply beyond, making money, making it famous, or which is like a pretty cliche, kind of thinking about like the ones that really made it. But there's some personal characteristic that made it deeply personal for them to build that particular company.
So beyond the return, there was just this feeling, this like mission. Was it like you say mission that like the cliche wanted to change the world? I mean, how, yeah, I'm just, if you could.
Sure, I could be more specific. I could be more specific. Like, for example, two companies that I want to mention. One company is called Ease. Actually, they are now known for very different reasons. And they've expanded their business to become a, national company and serving many different markets, in a quite controversial category called cannabis.
Yep. I'm familiar with these.
Sure. So actually, I led both their seed investment and their Series B. And that was the company I actually invested in when they were only just 3 weeks old. Company actually made no sense for me because I wasn't a user. And especially growing up in an Asian family, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, how can this be a company? Like, growing up, I thought cannabis was like, hard drugs, like
evil. Yeah.
Evil. Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I saw a pitch deck that said we're delivering cannabis, though medical cannabis, I thought it was a euphemism for, like a nice way a professional way to talk about like
being a dealer. Yeah.
But it turned out that, for, the early days of Ease building off of a lot of medical customers, there were a lot of patients that actually needed medicinal cannabis as a therapy, as a cure for whether, they had arthritis, they had, they couldn't eat, they couldn't sleep, whatever, that was bothering them. And this was actually the safest alternative form of medication that they could get. But when it was an illegal industry, that was very inaccessible. It was possibly dangerous. It's very shady. Mm-hmm. And, in this particular case, when I heard the pitch, I realized that there was it was a very large opportunity that was very contrarian, very different. And the founder really had a good understanding of what the opportunity was there. So it doesn't necessarily, in that example, it's not necessarily like, I want to change the world. I don't think, it was changing the patients' lives, offering a better service and a very needed product that there was like no service for, not even just available. It's like illegal, right? It's like an illegal service prior to that.
Yeah. No, I've used Ease, for when Jane had leukemia, my late wife. When she had leukemia, cannabis products made it easier for her to tolerate the chemo, as well as her appetite, and just put her in a better mood. With because he was like super moody. And we would call him up. It was one time we had we called 3 things at the same time: Ease, caviar, right? And then it was like a DoorDash or something. It was like at the same time we called all 3. Ease showed up first, and I'm like, she would eat edibles for her appetite. And what we found out was that she was on pain meds and other things, and that taking cannabis allowed her to reduce the amount of like opioids that she could take, because they were just wreck her. Like, she could feel the pain, but she would just be not herself.
Yeah.
Thank you for investing. You helped my late wife, Jane, feel a little better. So good job, Ease. Way to go.
I think actually, kind of following on that, starting that VC firm was pretty much starting a startup, because we had to figure things out. And that reminds me, in the early days of Ease, my co-founder, Jarie was obviously also very hands-on, in our portfolio companies. It got so, kind of alluding to your point about the driving experience, Jarie actually went out there and pretended to be Lyft drivers. So then we can rip off, should I say this out loud? I don't even. So we can learn from.
Yeah, learn.
We can learn from how some of the other giants that have already figured out some stuff around how to onboard drivers, how to make sure the drivers drive efficiently, what are the things they care about. And then we can kind of bring that SOP and learn about it and then implement it at Ease, because Ease also had to pick up, drive, and deliver. Although it was not exactly the same, we had to do a lot else. But like that was the level of like granularity we had to figure out how to help and be there. And I think that was very insightful to learning in general.
Yeah, I think even back then, I think I had to pay cash when the guy showed up. Yeah. I think I could put the credit card, and I'm all okay. Here's and again, like, you weren't really stealing their stuff. Like good, great artists steal things, and that stuff is not, I mean, come on, like it's just learning, but I appreciate that you have some level of ethics on delivery of medical cannabis when it was illegal, all in cash. Which I thought was great. But okay, so it's really founding team is sort of like what you looked for as an investor, as well as depending on your exit. Venture path, clear metric. I like the way you put it, that the end state is 100% clear. Like if you can't get to the end state with your pitch, you're not VC fundable. Doesn't mean you're not a great business. Just that's what they're looking for. That's pretty straightforward. On the other side, which people normally call lifestyle business, unit economics matter, all that sort of stuff. Are there any other like things along the way that you're like, gosh, I wish I would have known that beforehand,
I mean, so many. I think I double click on the founder thing. I was like founders are extreme. I think the best founders I find are very extreme in one way or another. When I say deeply personal, that personal thing is like really extreme. Something just hits them, or their personality in some way. Some people have the most extreme focus I've ever met in my life. Others are extremely passionate about, what they're doing. So different flavors, but I think it takes a certain type of personality to be able to do that. I wish this is not a no thing, more like the two pathways I said before. I feel like right now is a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur in the non-VC type of business as well. I wish I had these AI tools. I could be like 1 person equals 20, like 2 people equals 40 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can build a fantastic business.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's the pace of it's just insane. Like, I've been through 2 or 3 major technology disruptors. There was computers, clearly, like once we started having computers, it was, wow, this is incredible. The internet was another huge, massive disruption. Then there's always the SaaS, right? Like really moving stuff to the cloud, which is disruptive, but not as disruptive as AI. Like AI is hands down insanity. Like how much you can do with what you have. And then I just think it's going to unlock, I personally am with you, I'm optimistic. It's going to unlock a lot of human potential that you just don't have to do the stupid stuff you don't want to do, like I don't know. The naysayers tend to be very, like the world's going to be taken over by the overlords, but I just thought that I'm more optimistic like you. I really think there's problems to solve and we should just go solve them.
There's more than ever we can do more with our own hands. I would say, looking back, I just wish I did more. There's always like what I think I can do, but honestly, what I end up doing was always limited just by what I thought I could do. And like, I think I've actually a younger alum from my university actually reached out the other day, and kind of that's how I came about, dropping out of school and starting a company, and that's what I did, ask alums for advice. So that really reminded me of like when I first started my company, I would hit up like, try to guess alumni emails and try to figure out how to reach them. And they'd be like, how did you find me? And I was like, oh, I just guessed your email.
I'm a genius,
But it's just like, if you can think big and then you align your actions against it, I just wish I did more. Now, of course, I think I did a lot, but that's just the ultimate barrier. You can do way more than you think, so you should think more anyway.
Actually, you're really good. I like that. Can do way more than you think, so you should just think more, think bigger. I like that, because I do think people limit themselves, especially in the modern world. Like, what's the limit? I think it's just your time awake almost, What do you see as, any of those kind of limits?
So it's like developing own conviction, like understanding who you are. I think that's a huge limitation for what the limits are. Like as you do them, I think are actually more symptomatic of something deeper. Like you could do anything once you set your mind to it, or if you're assuming you're in you believe and you're in the mindset to do something, then you want to, then assumably you would do something that aligns with that. But it's much harder to actually get you to the state mentally to be ready, capable, want to, and kind of align all of those things to go in a particular direction. Especially now when you have information everywhere. You can believe in any of those things.
Yeah. We're pretty much saturated with that. So, how would you recommend like a new entrepreneur kind of align, how to kind of get past that limitation, for lack of a better word, your idea of like, hey, think bigger. How would you, what's the step or a step, or what's something you think they should do?
So I guess for me, it's a lot of introspection and also a lot of conversation, methodical and deliberate conversation with, let me take a step back so I can frame it a little bit better. I think it's very important to have an opinion. I think we're drawing a lot of different threads here that makes my mind jump all over the place. I'm kind of like trying to step up to the 30,000 feet level and then kind of go down from there. I think as an entrepreneur, you need to have very high conviction and passion about what you're doing, at least high conviction, right? But in order to have high conviction and have big vision and believe that you're building something great, if you want to go that way, you have to have personal conviction, but personal conviction only comes from you. That's literally it's in the word itself, right? And so you have, in order to build that personal conviction, you have to do the work to deserve conviction and confidence. You have to do the work, whether that's through your personal experience, through what you have felt, and throughout the pain point of the exact problem you're solving for, or you've put in the work to really study every single dynamic of this particular problem, and that's why you believe you can build a better solution. Whatever that might be, you have to do the work and repeatedly test that against, your own assumptions, other people's attacks on it and criticism on it to, over time arrive at conviction. And so you have to do the work. You have to do the work, and this is a contrast again. This contrast with a different approach might be like following the latest shiny object. Everybody's creating an AI company, so why don't I create an AI company, right? Like let's just hop on the bandwagon and just doing that. Well, anybody could do that.
Yeah, I agree. I like to do the work. As a writer, resonates with me. People say, "How do you write a book?" I say, "Just write." They're like, "Well, it's hard." I said, "Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard." Like, "Well, Jarie, how have you written 10 books?" I said, "I do the work. I just write. I don't think about it, and it sucks and it's horrible. But over time, I get better at it."
I'm curious. Do you have some like routines, like or tactics to that?
Yeah, I mean, typically for me, I need to have an idea of what I want to do. And then I usually outline the idea, and I have snippets. So I'm always on my phone and I'm always like writing ideas. So, the notes app in iPhone, I will literally be there going, "Oh, it's a great idea." And I'll write the idea down. So anytime I have an idea, thought, I'll tell you, I'll give you the best example of this. So I'm working on an origin story, my personal origin story. I feel that it is important that you have an origin story so that what you said, you have a point of view and an opinion, because your origin story defines the lens in which you create your point of view. So I happen to be a Gen X, person. I've had a very specific experiences. So my point of view, the filter of which my point of view passes through, is my origin story. So I always think that companies need an origin story. If you want a good company, if you want to get people to understand your company, it has to be repeatable. It has to be simple. Your grandmother needs to understand what you do, right? It's like really important. And I try to strive and tell the clients I work with at my day job, as well as just generally, like, what's your story? What's your big idea? How are you going to get people to like pay attention? Because no one gives a shit about what you do, right? So for me, writing is more about idea collection, and then it's idea curation. So this origin story, I was literally like, my My dad died a month ago, and we're at a family lunch for my mom's birthday, right? And we're sitting around, and I have two other brothers, so there's three kids, and we're like, well, we're gonna have a memorial for him, a celebration of life. And they both look at me and they go, I guess you're writing the eulogy. And I'm all, I guess so, right? Like, okay, I'm the writer in the family, sure. But as I started thinking about that and the anecdotes and stories, I started to realize, I'm like, holy shit, like who I am, my origin story is why I have the point of view I have. And I'm like, wow, I tell other people, I tell companies write their origin story. I tell other people, I've never done, I should do this. So then I had these ideas. But what was interesting is that I had already had this thought process. I wanted to do something called The Moth. I wanted to tell a story at The Moth, which is a 5-minute open mic type thing. And I'm all, well, I should write some stories that I could tell at The Moth. And a lot of them are about how I grew up. And I'm all, oh, I've got these stories. I got my origin story. I can use the anecdote. So for me, it's just, I capture ideas. I work on them. I anneal them. I maturate them. And then I curate the idea. And then for me, the writing's easy. To me, it's like, I do these story driven books. I'm like, oh, I've been doing a lot of web pages for my job. I'll write one about how to write a web page, stuff like that, where it's just what you're interested in. I don't write every day. I'm not that disciplined, but when I get an idea and I want to write it, I just write it. I like get it down and go crazy. I'm like obsessed. Oh my God, I got to get this down. Right. So that's sort of my process. Probably not the best process because it's super ad hoc, but it works for me.
That's great to know. Like I've always wanted to write better, but actually hearing you break it down, it's like, I've rarely spoken to someone who has written one book, 2 books, let alone 10 books. That volume actually already is like kind of insane. Producing those works.
It can be, yeah. And that on top of all the blog posts and, these interviews, which are not hiding, but, done 250 of these kind of interviews. So it's just like, to your point, I think it comes back around to, I'm passionate about storytelling. Like I'm borderline obsessed about it, to the point where I love hearing people's stories. I just love, how do I craft the narrative? How do I, and this is what companies need to do. As a startup founder, crazy Uncle Jarie is going to complain and bitch and moan to you until the end of the earth that you're not writing better stories about your company. Your company story is going to always suck. You need to make it better constantly. And that means being obsessive about it. Even reading through your webpage, what you've done, it's good stuff. It could be better, of course, but most people can't even get to that level, I just think it's storytelling, like the best story wins. Like, how can you not know this? It's like, so to me, it's obsessive, to your point about things. So, well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the show. This has been great. Appreciate it.
I hope I was, able to tell a good story for the listeners. And
well, you're aware, breed of, I was an investor and now I'm an operator. Like, there are not many of those. Not a lot of people go investor to founder. They go the other way, but they hardly ever go that way. So thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Entrepreneur Ethos Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it. My hope is that you learned something that can make you a little bit better. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do share it with friends and review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also join my email list by visiting theentrepreneurethos.com to get my thoughts on what I'm doing to get better, as well as what I'm working on. You can also pick up my book, The Entrepreneur Ethos, if you want to learn the traits, values, and beliefs that I think we need to build a more ethical, inclusive, and resilient entrepreneur and, frankly, world community. Feel free to follow me on Twitter @TheDailyMBA and let me know if you have any questions or recommendations for a guest you'd like me to talk to. Also, drop me a note if you try anything we talked about on this or any other episode. I'd love to hear what's working for you. Until next time, keep getting better.